Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library and Museum in Simi Valley, California, where we're covering the Reagan National Defense Forum. Our coverage here is sponsored by Leonardo DRS, and we're talking to newly elected Congressman from Wisconsin's 8th District, Republican Mike Gallagher, who served in the United States Marine Corps as an intelligence officer. You've got your PhD from Georgetown University, and how are you liking your first year in Congress?
It's been an interesting new experience. So someone asked me, how is it different than the military? And I said, well, it's similar, except everyone thinks that they're in charge simultaneously. So I think the newer members in particular that got elected in this unique election cycle, on both sides of the aisle, I think we feel a sense of urgency. And a sense of what I mentioned on the panel earlier today, that whatever we're doing, politics as usual is not really working out for either side. And so we hope we can bring kind of a new civil debate to some of these intractable problems.
And that's on both sides, whether it's Seth Moulton, Adam Kinzinger, and you are part of that new generation. What I want to take you first is on the question of extending the CR and whether or not we're going to be looking at a government shutdown.
Yeah.
CR, the current continuing resolution expires on December the 8th. GOP leadership's talked about extending that to the 22nd or even into next year. How do you think this is going to play out? And Adam Smith, the ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee, thinks likelihood of a shutdown is high, even as early as on December the 9th. Talk to us on where you fall on all of that.
Sure. So I would suspect that there will be a short-term CR, which is suboptimal, but far better than, I think, a 6-week CR that brings us into next year. I don't think there's any appetite, particularly among defense hawks, for a mid to long-term CR. We've operated for far too long, and as you've heard all day today, I think on every panel, it's devastating for the military. So I would suspect we're going to have a short-term CR leading to perhaps a separate vote on defense approps that you could potentially throw border security into. And if the Democrats want a deal on DACA, we can have that debate as well and throw that over to the Senate and see what they do with it. I don't know how that plays out, and I don't necessarily think we should be gaming votes in the Senate. I think we should do what's right in the House, and then they can do their job as well. So I think short-term CR followed by a defense approps vote before the end of the year, hopefully leading to a broader BCA deal. I know the Speaker's been working diligently to strike a BCA agreement. I think it was unfortunate that the meeting with leadership on the Democratic side and Republican side and the President didn't go forward. I think we need to have those discussions, and I think we can have a healthy debate about what needs to be addressed and in what order, and I would hope we could do that and avoid a shutdown.
The nation's debt is $20.6 billion and rising. There are those who look at the tax plan and say, okay, that's going to be $1 trillion more, assuming that it goes through in roughly the shape that it is. Supporters say that it'll spur economic growth, but the fundamental thing is that it increases the nation's debt. Adam Smith believes, and he said so earlier today, that that's going to come back to haunt defense spending at some point. You are a veteran. You are a defense hawk. Do you think that we're only looking at 1 or 2 years more spending upside? And if it is 1 or 2 more years of spending upside, where's the best place to put those resources?
Sure. Great question. Well, I appreciate some of my Democratic colleagues' newfound interest in fiscal conservatism and the debt, which doubled under the last administration. If you accept the growth projections that $1 trillion figure on, you're accepting a very anemic growth projection. Our estimate is that we can grow in a sustained period of time for in upwards of 3%. And if we do that, you could actually see a surplus coming into the government coffers. But again, we're working under different assumptions, and I fear just talking past each other. And I think if you look at our broader budgetary picture, we really at some point are going to have to confront mandatory spending. And I say this is one of 3 millennials in the House, where we're passing a burden of debt on to the next generation because we can nickel and dime the military and every non-defense discretionary account, but still we're not confronting the 70% of the budget that goes out the door every year without any review from the elected representatives of the American people. That's Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and interest on the debt. We're going to be spending more money to pay down our interest on the debt than we're going to be spending on the Pentagon in a few short years. So that tells you how out of control our priorities are right now. And I'll admit, I think one of the most shocking things to me as someone who's new to politics is how difficult it is to have a conversation about those issues. And anytime someone tries, you get millions of dollars spent against you in a campaign. And my hope is that the newer members can at least carve out a space where we can have that conversation. Because if we're concerned about the debt, and I think we should be, and I welcome the ranking member is concerned about the debt, we have to discuss those things at the end of the day. But I don't think we should hold the military hostage to any of these discussions. I think the first and foremost function of the federal government is to provide for the common defense. We should do that first. That allows us, that 19-year-old kid from Marinette, Wisconsin, holding a rifle downrange in Iraq and Afghanistan, gives us the freedom to argue and beat ourselves up peacefully over the direction of healthcare in this country, the direction of retirement security in this country. So I think we need to take care of the military spending first and then have a discussion about these longer-term issues.
When it comes to prioritizing programmatically or for readiness, obviously Secretary Mattis has made it clear that readiness is the number one priority to make sure that troops are ready to fight. But there's a massive modernization bow wave that's coming down the pike. And you represent in your district the Marinette Shipyard, which is one of the two littoral combat ship builders. Talk to us, where do you see, if there are going to be limited resources, right? Let's take the worst case scenario that it's going to be a short-term amount of money. Where would you want the Pentagon to put those resources?
Well, I think the Pentagon, and we heard it from H.R. McMaster as well today, is going to put them in readiness, and there's this idea of buying back readiness. But I just think that's a dangerous false choice we're walking into, because in order to alleviate some of the pressure on our readiness concerns, we need to grow the size of the force simultaneously. We need more hulls in the water. I mean, the Navy has validated its requirement for 355 ships time and again. Part of that is 52 small surface combatants. You referenced the littoral combat ship, and we know we're going to have a competition for the frigate as well. And you just look at what, this whole conference has been focused on our position relative to our adversaries. Just take China, for example. China's fleet is at 300 ships right now. They have the largest navy in the Pacific. Now, our vessels are more advanced, but last year they commissioned 18 ships. Some of them are getting very advanced. There was a guided missile destroyer, 3 guided missile frigates, 6 cruisers. We need more ships in the water now. I mean, not 30 years from now. We need it within the next 8 years. And I've just been troubled by the lack of urgency surrounding that challenge. And we really need a partnership with the Pentagon on this issue. I think there were some of us who were disappointed when the budget came out and we had a number that was a 3% increase over the Obama budget, which was woefully insufficient. I'm glad that in a bipartisan way, and I give credit to Chairman Whitman and the ranking member on Sea Power as well, for increasing the shipbuilding account and proving that we have to do both simultaneously. So I'm not trying to punt on your question. I know the Pentagon is going to invest in readiness based on everything we heard today, but the reality is we got to do both at the same time and make investments now that are going to pay off for the next 2 decades.
Do you think that there's going to be any motion on spending caps? I mean, the Budget Control Act, and the 3% increase was over the amount of money that was approved, right? The Obama administration did the same thing the Trump administration is doing, which is to ask for tons more money than it was ever going to get.
Yeah.
Do you think, are the spending caps going to get lifted this year, do you think, to allow more money? Because, one of the things that we keep hearing is there's a difference between what the authorization number is, but what appropriators are going to appropriate.
Yeah, so I think they're looking at a 2-year cap deal, which means after those 2 years, you still have the caps in place until 2022, I believe is when they expire. So, I'd prefer getting rid of the caps entirely and then going back to regular order and passing 12 separate appropriations bills, as I'm told we should be doing business. I've only been here a year, so I've never seen it.
Once upon a time, that's kind of how we used to do
what
things.
Is this regular order that everyone speaks of? It's like waiting for Godot. It never arrives. So I think they're looking at that 2-year cap deal. But listen, I mean, how many, I think it was Ambassador Edelman who said, every year he's been coming here for 5 years saying, we need to end the BCA, we need to end the BCA, and every year we don't. It gets worse. To quote Secretary Mattis, we've done more damage to our military than any enemy in the field could have hoped to do. And at some point, we're going to see the consequence of this, and it's going to get ugly.
If I got a quarter for each editorial I've written about why it should go away, I'd be a very wealthy man. Alas, let me take you to the question of shipbuilding. Are you satisfied with the plan the Navy has? The LCS program, the Littoral Combat Ship Program, has come under criticism. It was supposed to be cheap and fast, and it became more expensive, but it still was the foundational platform that the last administration endorsed and said that was core, endorsed that 52-ship requirement, but then dialed it back a little bit over concerns about whether a frigate version was going to be needed, and now we're going to have a competition among everybody as well as new entrants that are going to be coming in the picture. Are you satisfied with the Navy's strategy on that?
Well, listen, I think we've learned some useful lessons in the development of the program and what happens when you constantly change requirements. But I think it's a credit to both the shipyards that they weathered that, and they've gotten incredibly efficient over time. And now the ship that we're providing to the Navy is one that the Navy likes and wants more of. I mean, you talk to anyone that's using these ships downrange. On the Independence class that's out in Singapore right now, they got a harpoon on that thing, and they want more of them. I mean, these ships can go places that destroyers can't. And so as we look to the future in the Navy's plan, I just think we need to be careful about loading up a fast frigate or the future small surface combatant with so much stuff that it in effect becomes a small destroyer, because that's not what this is all about, right? We want a smaller ship. We want to make it as survivable and as lethal as humanly possible, but we also want it to be relatively affordable. And I think we've learned a lot of useful lessons, and more to the point, we've just made huge investments in the shipyards. I mean, in human beings, right? That's just an incredibly skilled workforce, and we can't afford to lose another shipyard in this country. We have 7. As a matter of national security, I've been doing a little bit of a deep dive into the defense industrial base and trying to write about it, but I think, God forbid we ever found ourselves in a conventional war with China, but I think if we did, there are serious questions as to whether the defense industrial base could even keep up, given how fragile it is right now. And those are, and then you start to look in sort of the subcomponent suppliers, the little guys who, they're the ones that get crushed with all this budget certainty, right? I mean, if you're a Lockheed, if you're a Boeing, you can weather that because you're a big company with a lot of resources. But if you're a small company that's supplying to one of them, it is so damaging to not know what the Pentagon budget's going to be or not know what the future status of these programs are. So I just hope we get some certainty over the long term. I think a healthy competition for the frigate will be a good thing, but let's learn the lessons from the LCS program.
Do you think that there should be 5-year budgeting and go to 5-year budget plans so that to give it that kind of certainty? Because there are those who say that the Future Years Defense Plan, the FYDP, has never been paid attention to, and we heard that in the first session. Hey, China does 5-year budgeting.
Well, I'm definitely on board. My predecessor was a big champion of biannual budgeting, which I think is a good idea. I haven't thought about 5 years. I think, was it the Commandant today, or someone made a comment about how China does the 5-year plan. I think that might be a bit too long for our political system, but certainly, it would be nice to do a 1-year budget at this point, given how long we'd operate under continuing resolutions or omnibus bills.
There's that Godot guy again.
That's right. So I think biannual budgeting makes a lot of sense to me. And I think it would still, protect the equities of the authorizers and the appropriators at the same time. And that'd be in line with the congressional cycle as well, and allow for the elected representatives of the American people and the American people themselves to have a say in these programs rather than just putting them on autopilot for the entire course of a presidential term.
Let me ask you one last question. I mean, there are a growing number of young, energetic members, combat veterans. As you look at our strategy in Iraq, having gotten in Iraq, the strategy in Afghanistan, as familiar as you are with those, how do you and your generation look at wanting to change the system? Yeah. It appears that almost everything we do because that's the way we've done it. And reform is just movement around the edges. But if you look at even perhaps the composition of a military unit, you can almost look at it and say, well, wait a minute, does it have all of the pieces that you've needed, for example, in any sort of counterinsurgency operation, as an organic part of that unit instead of looking at it? As you guys talk amongst yourselves, do you talk about the need for actually far more deeper and systemic change, whether it comes from national service, given that only 1% of the American population is serving in uniform, or just fundamentally how we're organized, how we train, and how we equip ourselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do have these debates, and I'm actually highly encouraged by the young sort of 9/11 veterans, veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan that are serving. You mentioned Moulton and Kinzinger, which are two great examples. And even in my class, we have Jimmy Panetta, who's Leon Panetta's son, who's a Navy guy. We have Brian Mast, an Army guy, Scott Taylor. We have a Marine Corps 3-star, Jack Bergman, who represents the district to the north of mine. I thought I had escaped the Marine Corps hierarchy when I came to Congress, but only to have a 3-star right above me. So I think we have a growing crop of talent, and I have to believe that creates a body of people that can work together to get some stuff done. I think for a long time we've been searching for a silver bullet solution to the problem of Salafi jihadism. But at the end of the day, I think some enduring and exciting truths are still relevant, which is to say we have to stay forward engaged. I think our abandonment of our gains in Iraq is the foremost example of why that is, and there is no technology. I know there's been a lot of talk about a third offset, and I'm all for investing in it, but there's no technology that can substitute for, a Marine being in an austere location abroad, working with local partners on the ground to gain and maintain territory. And at the end of the day, we have to do more with our allies and convince them to take charge of their own security, with us playing that essential leadership function in the region. I mean, we're the leader of an alliance bloc in the Middle East and the only one that can assign roles and missions to a variety of countries there. And as I look at the region, I actually see an opportunity right now. There is actually a historic level of cooperation going on between countries that don't traditionally cooperate, Israel and Egypt, and Israel and the Sunni Arab Gulf states. The problem is it's a de facto alliance built in opposition to recent U.S. policy in the region, which was to allow Iran to have a sphere of influence and achieve what the previous president called a new equilibrium. Well, that didn't work out. But I think we have an opportunity to organize all our allies in the region around a strategy of rolling back Iranian influence. So I think we need to ask some hard questions as to whether we've actually done that in the new administration. I think there's actually a disturbing amount of continuity in our Syria policy from the last administration to the present. And I think we can't, under any circumstances, allow this Iranian-Russian axis of influence to stretch from Tehran through Iraq in a land bridge to Damascus. So I think that's really the challenge in the region right now. And then I think as we look to our own homeland and our own defenses, I chair this task force on denying terrorist entry in the United States, and we've taken a look at all the pathways through which people could enter this country. And I think we're going to come out with a report that has useful recommendations on how to enhance our vetting procedures, how to enhance the visa waiver program and our partnership with our allies. The most difficult issue that I think my generation of veterans needs to think about, and I'd be lying to you if I had a solution right now, it's the way in which terrorists cross our borders thousands of times each day, digitally, right? The problem of online radicalization is so difficult to get at. But I think the first step we can take is to continue to keep pressure on ISIS and al-Qaeda in the Middle East. Because the longer we allow the caliphate to exist in physical space, the more we allow it to grow in the hearts and minds of disaffected young Muslims across the world. So that's a long way of me saying that we need to stay forward engaged and partnered with our allies. And I welcome new thinking. If nothing else, I think we should think about where do we have opportunities to create new allies. The Kurds come to mind in the region. I'm glad to see the administration continuing an investment in India, which I view to be the decisive partnership over the next couple of decades with respect to countering a rising China, and also putting enhanced pressure on Pakistan to change its behavior, which we've been talking about for a long time, but that's necessary, perhaps rethinking Pakistan's major non-NATO ally status. So I think there's room for new thinking and new conversations because the status quo is not working out that well in many cases.
If you ask Mike Mullen, though, he almost qualified for Pakistani citizenship. He was spending so much time there. Let me ask you one last question. Are you concerned at all that the America First strategy of the president, combined with the anti-immigration talk, is going to, A, make it harder for us to cooperate, and that question has come up in different panels, including the first one, but also make it harder for the United States to attract the immigrant talent that it so desperately needs and has been such a core part of American innovation?
Well, I think you have to look beyond Twitter to what's actually happening around the world, and I think it's mixed, right? I expressed some concerns about our strategy in the Middle East, but I give the administration extremely high marks for its policy in Asia. I think if you talk to the Japanese and a lot of our other key partners there, they would express an appreciation for a real enhanced attention on the region. Obviously, the urgent threat of North Korea has united a lot of our allies right now, and I think we need to continue doing that. I think we need to stay forward engaged. But at some point, I mean, we come up against a limit in our resources. I mean, we're short amphibs. We have 32. We need 38. I think that raises serious questions about whether we could actually execute our war plans. God forbid we find ourselves in a war in North Korea. We're short Aegis-equipped destroyers. We're out 2 of them because they collided in commercial vessels, the Fitz and McCain, tragically killing 17 soldiers. So I think the best thing we can do to ensure that America First doesn't mean America alone is to provide the Pentagon with the resources it's need to extend into these critical areas of the world. As for your second question,
immigration.
Okay. Listen, I think people in both parties could recognize that our immigration system is broken. I mean, it makes us profoundly uncompetitive. So I do think we need to secure the border first and foremost. We just passed a bill out of Homeland Security to the tune of $15 billion, which I thought was a smart bill. It would not only leverage a physical barrier in some areas where the sector calls for such a mechanism, but also leverage the best technology, ground sensors, overhead sensors, more people, Border Patrol agents on the ground. We know we have operational control of less than half the southern border, far less of the northern border as well. So I think we can start with that, but then also transition to a discussion about how to fix our immigration system to make it more competitive. I quite like the idea of moving from a family-based system to a merit-based system, but I think an arbitrary reduction in numbers makes no sense because we want a system that's flexible enough to scale up or scale down depending on the needs of our economy. If you're from a heavy agricultural district like mine, we need a visa program that works, that's fully transparent. We know people are coming in, and the state can say this is how many visas we need. So I actually think there's an opportunity to have that discussion. I think the heated rhetoric on both sides makes it more difficult. And I know I sound naive as a new person to politics, but I just got to believe, I kind of wish they would just lock us in the House chamber, maybe turn off the cameras so people weren't posturing endlessly, and just say, fix it, get it done. And I think reasonable people could come to a solution.
I don't want to make this a dig against Brian Lamb, but I mean, there are folks who say that's the byproduct of C-SPAN. Let me ask the last question. I mean, Canada, you're in a state where, Canada is the United States' leading trading partner. It's the longest unprotected border in the world. And the relationship between the two countries is seamless, whether it's to security, if you look at it from a NORAD perspective. And yet that relationship has been souring. It's been souring over the softwood lumber issue. It's been souring over the Bombardier issue. Are you concerned at all, for example, that the dissolution of NAFTA is going to hit your state very hard in the event that the deal is broken?
Well, I sent a letter to where we got all the freshman Republicans to sign to Lighthizer, basically saying, you guys want to renegotiate NAFTA? That's great. These economies have evolved significantly since the deal was signed, and I think there's room for an intelligent discussion about that. And in terms of my district, which is heavy dairy industry, we know the Canadians are, from our perspective, abrogating some aspects of the agreement when it comes to the protectionism of their dairy market. And so we want to be able to have that tough and frank conversation among our close friends. So my hope, though, and we expressed this in the letter, was that as we do that, we're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because I think it would put a rift between us and our closest ally at a time of profound international crisis. And we've talked a lot about strategy today, but we forget sort of the basic lessons of geopolitics and why we're so fortunate in America. We're functionally a continent-sized island because we have friendly neighbors to the north and the south. We don't agree on everything, but relative to some other areas of the world, we're incredibly fortunate. That gives us strategic depth to confront a lot of other important issues. So I would hope that we avoid a rift with one of our closest allies at a time of profound international crisis. More broadly, you look at the Five Eyes partnership. That is a foundation for global order right there. Our intense and close cooperative relationship with the Canadians, with the Aussies, with the Brits, with the Kiwis, it's incredible. I worked at the National Counterterrorism Center for a couple of years. Whenever I had the night shift, midway through, we'd call over to our Five Eyes partners and we'd share intel, check how they're doing, and it's incredible. This year we're celebrating 100 years of mateship, which is 100 years since our first battle with the Australians, the Battle of Amel, where Americans actually fought under Australian command. And you just look at the history of these relationships. Canadians, Brits, Aussies, we've just fought side by side in all these conflicts. And I think that's a starting point for any discussion about U.S. role in the world. That's our team, right? And we need to build outward from our team. And so that's not to say we can't have disagreements about things, and we're having that, but I think there's a lot of room between getting out of NAFTA entirely and accepting the status quo, and I hope we can arrive somewhere in the middle.
Congressman Mike Gallagher, Wisconsin Republican, thanks very much for your time.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah.